It's just after noon Central Time, which means it's my privilege to welcome you to today's Alumni Career Webinar, Navigating Career Transition for Military Personnel, presented by Sean Singleton. My name is Lauren Forrest, and I'm the Associate Director for Career Programs here at the Alumni Association. Our office is committed to helping provide alumni with the resources they need to stay competitive in an ever-changing job market and support the alumni community with career resources, networking channels, and job search capabilities. It's my privilege to introduce you to our presenter today, UChicago alumnus, Sean Singleton. Sean is a 2008 graduate of the Booth School of Business and 1994 graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. He is former Air Force officer and special agent. Sean is a principal at NewCap Partners and founder of Oglethorpe Capital, network of Oglethorpe places capital into cutting-edge middle-market ventures through leveraging an extensive network of business owners, entrepreneurs, and subject matter experts across the United States. At NewCap, Sean addresses the strategic needs of entrepreneurs, investors, and shareholders of companies by facilitating growth, increasing shareholder value, and creating liquidity events through mergers and acquisitions, buyouts, recapitalizations, and equity financing. During today's webinar, you will learn how to leverage the skills and experiences gained during military service to find gainful employment after serving in the armed forces. Sean will also address the questions that many of you submitted via our registration page ahead of time. Now let me welcome Sean.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren, and everyone who's joining the call. And I also like to introduce a colleague and a Booth classmate of mine, Ryan Simpson, who's with Antares out of Los Angeles. Ryan also has a similar background. We're both 2008 Booth grads, and he's also a 2002 grad of the United States Air Force Academy. And Ryan has been in finance the entire career since graduating from Booth. We were both, obviously, career switchers going into Chicago Booth, and as a result of the two years of experiences that we had there at school, combined with what we were able to do pre-business school, we were able to parlay a lot of those skill sets and experiences into a career that was so drastically different than what we did before, that we feel that we have a few lessons learned for you all out there that are in a similar situation, or if you're at a certain part in your career and you're trying to sort of do an assessment of where you are to actually springboard into something new or actually make some slight modifications in what you do. I think bottom line, long story short, and I'll let Ryan pick up after this next point, is that because you have a military background, for those of you that have served, that please do focus on the fact that you have a skill set and attributes, probably more importantly, that are very malleable, that you can actually leverage into anything that you set your mind to. So with that being said, Ryan, if you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts coming into this conversation about some of the things that you've experienced as a career switcher going into finance and some of the lessons learned that you have.
Yes, absolutely. Appreciate that intro, Sean. So I 100% agree with Sean from the standpoint that the skills you have from a military background are not only malleable, but and sorry to rhyme here, but they're also extremely valuable in the civilian world. And of those skills that you have, some, if not many, cannot necessarily be obtained or learned or taught. You experience them through your military career, and some of them that would highlight that civilian employers do find extremely valuable, include the obvious one, leadership. You're given a lot of responsibility at a very young age in the military that you just simply don't get in the civilian world. I would say just having that discipline, not only to, one, be able to make it through the military training, whichever military training you have, but then subsequently succeed in it, is something that some of their civilian colleagues just don't have that same level. Integrity, further, is another skill that's not even called a skill. It's an attribute that you are just innately have that people value in the civilian workforce. And finally, I would end with the ability to accomplish something in the prescribed time frame, whatever that goal happens to be. And you kind of take those skills and they just, I can't emphasize enough how much civilian employers look for those, value those, and put you just in a different camp than other folks. With that being said, I do want to pause here for a minute, and I don't know if folks have the ability to speak up if they want to, but I think Sean and I would like to treat this as a bit of a Q&A session. So as folks have questions and they do come up in this conversation, please feel free to ask in whatever manner that they need to be brought up, and Sean, I'd be happy to answer them. So with that, I'd be happy to transition into other thoughts we have on how you can successfully go into the civilian workforce, depending on what you want to do and how you want to do it.
Well, so with that being said, Ryan, just one thing, and thank you so much for those very wonderful comments. Could you share with us a little bit of your thought processes going to business school, what you hope to get out of the experience going in August of 2006, and some of the things that you had on your mind as you were transitioning upon graduation into the career and Antares that you have?
Yes, absolutely. So I think going into business school, I knew it was the springboard that I was looking for to make that successful transition, and it really was kind of the only way to be able to do it. So I think as folks think about transferring out of the military and into the civilian workforce, I think you have to have at least some understanding or some direction of what you want to do and how you want to get there. So when I got done, where I knew my military career was coming to an end, where I was pushing toward to be an end, I wanted to focus on things that I found either exciting, intriguing, etc. And a lot of what I did in the Air Force and aircraft maintenance, it was very much connected to global macro events. Since I knew I wanted a career that was affected by those same events, so I kind of didn't lose touch. But in order to, and that ended up being in finance for multiple different reasons, which I won't delve too much into this call on, but I knew that business school was the way to do that. And so being able to draw that connection on what you did before and subsequently why you want to do something else, I think is key. And I bring that up from the standpoint that what I've even said now is actually what I told interviewers, because it's absolute honest truth in terms of business school and then what I'm doing now. So to provide more or less an example, so at Antares Capital, what we do is work with private equity shops to help finance the purchase of companies. So you think, how does that actually, from the grand scheme of things, how is that connected to global macro events? Well, one, just the rate that we charge them from a capital perspective. So we charge a certain interest rate, which obviously the Fed sets the interest rate, which is affected by many different macro events, plus the combination of the companies that we look at and we actually do underwrite them, they're affected by global macro events. So I'm not sure if everyone's able to kind of draw on that connection, but I do want to bring that up from the standpoint that as you think about your career, what you've done, the skills that I mentioned that you already have, and how you want to transition those skills, you have to be able to bring that story together, not only for business school, but then subsequently for your next employer. And so when you kind of bring those skills together, you're able to kind of move forward on that next step. I know there's a lot, so I want to pause there for another second to see if folks have any questions or thoughts about their particular careers right now and how they might be able to make that transition.
Ryan, this is Lauren, and I'll relay any questions that come through.
Okay.
We do have a couple if we want to integrate the questions during the session.
That'd be great.
Okay, perfect. One is, what is the best way for active duty members transitioning out to find a job? And do you recommend particular job boards, recruiters, or job fairs?
Good question. From a personal standpoint, I feel that business school is a great way to make a complete shift from the military, not to promote just the one way of doing it, but it kind of gives you the chance to hit the reset button and do something completely different. However, if you choose not to, which is 100% perfectly fine, I found at least stuff that I looked into when I got out were a lot of the military headhunters, and there's a few of them out there that tend to be good, and they're going to be able to help you transition into a career that you may want, but it'll be more they call it an entry-level position. I think the fairs are okay, the various job fairs, but if you want more of a targeted approach, I do believe that the various military headhunting agencies out there can be very helpful. And Sean, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts there.
No, I think that that's spot on, and it sort of depends, and this gets back into, I think, a larger point that Brian brought up. Because you are a military member, you are a part of probably one of the most expansive networks that you can possibly believe in. A lot of folks with military backgrounds are very reluctant to leverage their networks professionally because you sort of feel like you're intruding on someone. What I can say for a fact is that former service members and veterans would love to help you in that next step as you evaluate your options and maximize your optionality. So there are things like the Service Academy, career conferences that take place 4 times over the course of a year that are very valuable to actually at least put your toe in the water to sort of see what your market value happens to be, for lack of a better word. And, having those series of conversations with a host of companies, absolutely, they do prepare you for more entry-level jobs. At the same time, if you are contemplating going to business school or if you are contemplating having conversations with other folks separate and apart from those conferences, it's a good place to test out some of the ideas that you have and get feedback. Then coming back from a Service Academy career conference or any other job fair focused on transitioning military members, find out from those folks there at those fairs, who do they know in their network that might be relevant for what you seek to do in the course of your career, which gets into, I think, a larger point of every conversation that you have as you transition out. When you're talking with that individual, ask that person, well, considering that you know my story based off of this conversation, who else do you feel that I should reach out and get in touch with to sort of gather some additional information? And I think the most important thing for you to make that really informed decision is to gather as much information as you possibly can, because it's a new thing. I separated from active duty in 2000, and I had no clue that there was this business school option. And it wasn't until I was on a consulting engagement in my first civilian job with an individual who had gone to a top-tier business school that I even contemplated that as an option. And by having that conversation with that individual, the business school window opened up and climbed right through it. So as you pursue your options, as you meet with people, as you are gathering your information, always keep asking, what else should I be doing in order to advance that goal? And you'd be surprised at what doors might open as a result of that series of conversations, or those series of conversations.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Sean said, as far as the network goes, I can't emphasize how important that is to tap it and how beneficial it will be for you going on. And by no means, because I know we tend to be more reluctant, want to do things ourselves, feel like we're being a burden on a former military member that you may be reaching out to. But I would say that it's been absolutely invaluable to be able to for me personally, tap in that network. I mean, you could even go as simply as Sean and I obviously meeting at business school, but very much separated by a few years at the Air Force Academy. We're not even known each other there, but taking that a step further. So I started out with GE Capital. So Antares was divested from GE Capital just for folks' benefit, but to make it into the Antares business with my first job within GE Capital, I reached out to a Naval Academy grad and as well as a University of Chicago grad, which set me on the trajectory to enter into my current position, working with private equity shops across now really the West Coast. I recently tapped into a new client who has up the shop, who's a West Point grad. And so it just kind of goes on and on and on, and those are just a few examples. But I bring those up from the context that, or from the standpoint that you really will learn so much tapping into the military network and understanding what other folks have done, steps they've taken, and giving someone else a chance to hear your story and provide a recommendation based on where you want to go, because they either have gone through it or know someone who's gone through it that they can put you in touch with.
Spot on, spot on. And it's that candid feedback, because that person is automatically going to make the assumption that because you have a shared background that they can be very real with you, and they're going to give you the information that you need that a lot of folks might be a little bit apprehensive of relaying to you. So having that honest and candid feedback and getting that person's God's honest truth directed towards you is so invaluable.
This is Lauren. We got another question come through. Can you give an example of a time when you had to deal with stereotyping of your military experience and how you had dealt with it?
Well, so going into finance, a lot of folks will, and this is actually sort of true, and Ryan, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that, for those of you that went to civilian institutions out there and had a business finance focus at undergrad, kudos to you. Unfortunately for me, going to an Air Force Academy, it's mostly focused on engineering. And so you don't have a lot of accounting and finance classes. We have management classes, and they're actually expanding things out at the Air Force Academy. But you graduate not really knowing much about the world of finance. And so going into investment banking or some of the more analytical finance-focused positions, you're at a huge disadvantage. And one of the things that a lot of folks will look at and say to you, or at least I was at a huge disadvantage, was that, we're not going to necessarily move you along at the same path as others. And so you have to confront that and prove to them that you are just as capable and competent as your peers out there that might have gone to programs at other civilian institutions where they were top-tier finance programs. And, granted, you're never going to, at least I wasn't at the same level with those folks, yet getting back to some of the points that Ryan expressed earlier, from a leadership standpoint and be able to actually motivate a team to actually get to the bottom line goal of either getting a pitch deck or getting a deal done or getting the analysis of a deal done, those are the intangibles that you bring to the conversation. The understanding of finance will come as you do these deals more and more. But those intangibles that you bring to the table are the things that I think that really surprise a lot of employers that might not necessarily be familiar with military members. Ryan, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this goes a little bit back to how tying your skills that you've obtained in the military into what you want to do today. So to the point of being stereotyped, or you may not have the civilian experience or background, whether it's in finance, consulting, et cetera, I think what you have to draw upon and show folks is, your level of work ethic, discipline, ability to accomplish goals will enable you to do the job that's being set forth. So in other words, in the military world, you're obviously put in various jobs in various capacities through the course of your career in different locations. Essentially, sometimes it's picking up a new job, every 6 months, every year, whether you're PCS, whether you're deployed, et cetera, and be able to say, look, here is what I did within a period of a year and a half, and I had 4 or 5 different jobs, and I excelled at all of them. So that is just one example of how I'm able to now transition into this new world where people may have 5 or 6 years experience. Well, great, look what I did in a shorter amount of time. So I think, being able to explain your story of what you did previously in the military and why your ability to accomplish what you accomplished in that job was not dependent on your prior experience is going to be very important, so that civilian employer can see, oh my God, this person, they weren't trained in undergrad, where they went through ROTC, Air Force Academy, et cetera, and they were able to do their job in the military, which you might argue is as far as national defense is vastly than able to put a financial model or a pitch together. And they're able to do it in a shorter amount of time than some of their civilian counterparts. So I think being able to draw that together is vastly important. I say the other stereotype that at least I experienced a little bit was that coming from a military background, you may not be the type of person that's going to be able to easily integrate within a particular firm in terms of culture. There's a stereotype out there for military folks that you may be too rigid, too quote-unquote gung-ho. If folks are spending 12 to 14 hours plus a day with you, are they going to want to be around you? I think being able to show your more personal side is important. I can remember distinctly in one of my final interviews, and this was for an internship, doing more of the sales and trading function on Wall Street. I won't delve down that, but the question really came up on, okay, you were deployed a couple times, you did this, you did that. Why do you want to do this job, and how do you think you're going to incorporate in, and tell us a story about how you're not as quote-unquote hardcore or gung-ho as we think you are. So I told a story about the second time I was in Iraq. I forgot actually how to clear my pistol or my 9mm. I went through the whole story and how that so I won't dwell on that, but I think showing your personal side is also very important, not all in conjunction with your work ethic.
Spot on, and building on Ryan's comments, you think about it, less than 1% of the U.S. population has any familiarity or direct involvement in the United States military, right? So there's just, a lot of unknowns as it relates to how do you interact with folks in the military, and a lot of folks are sort of persuaded by Hollywood and television as far as what the military is like, right? So given that, the more that you can prove that, yes, that 1% of the population is still a part of the overall population, you just so happen to have a different calling for a large swath of your professional career, that goes a long way of actually normalizing the relationships. And then also, too, the positive aspects of you being a military member will come out once you get past that initial hurdle to where they say, yeah, this person's just like me, yet at the same time, there's just something a little bit special about him.
This is Lauren. Another question we received, similar to what we were just speaking about, is do you have any resume tips for those who have only military experience? In other words, how to translate this experience in a way that will make sense to someone receiving an online application for a job posting.
So I'll hit on this, Sean, just because I came in with only a military background, give one for business school and then two for my current job and an internship. And I would say a few different tips, if you will. One, no jargon, so no acronyms. Make sure that whatever you did, even, I was a maintenance officer on C-130s. I didn't specify C-130s. It was more generic with aircraft. So just the first tip would be no jargon. And the second one, and this goes for whether you're military, civilian, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's very simple. And it's what we did, at least we had OPRs in the Air Force, and depending on your service, whatever performance reports you had, the biggest takeaway on those reports and what you use on your resume whenever you're putting bullet points is what you did, how you did it, and what the result was. Every bullet point has to have that takeaway so that the civilian employers say, okay, he was a C-130 aircraft maintenance officer. Great. I have no idea what that really means. So tell me what you did, how you did, and what the result was. And then you're able to say, okay, I did this, I did that, and here's how I did it, and here's what the result was. And that they can then translate it in their minds, okay, to their civilian life. Or not civilian life, they're their civilian job that you may be applying for. Sean, I'll open up to you for any other tips.
I think that is spot on. If you think about it as if you're marketing yourself and yourself is your product, function, benefit, and use, function, and benefit. Being able to translate the exact things that you've done in your past, as far as speaking at a very macro level, are the things that they really appreciate and understand. And again, also too, as you're doing that translation from what you're doing in active duty, highlight the fact that you did whatever you happen to do have done in your background under tight timelines or in austere environments or in places that demonstrate that you have the leadership and you also have the aptitude of getting things done in the most pressure-filled situations, because that means a lot. And I think also too, with regards to citations, for whatever you have, if you have a meritorious service medal or if you have certain things in your background that suggest that you've done an exemplary job, try to civilianize those as much as you possibly can to show that you have marks of distinction in your career, especially if you're early on in your career. That can say that you were one of however many. You don't necessarily need to get as grandiose or as pie in the sky as a performance report. At the same time, be able to go ahead and try to quantify some of your accolades into something that someone who might not have a military background can understand.
Lauren, I don't know if there's any more questions there, and I'll apologize because I am going to have to sign off here. Unfortunately, the current job is calling me. So if there aren't any more questions, I do want to leave and more or less summarize a few thoughts, at least from my end. And Sean, I'll let you continue. But Lauren, I guess I'll open up for maybe one more question if there are any, at least for me.
Yeah, so we had some folks submit questions prior to the webinar, and I'm going to dive into those. And one of them that might be great for you to help out with is, as a military officer, What advice can you offer on how to apply to the big three management consulting companies?
Interesting one, and I say interesting because I actually did not apply to the big three consulting firms. However, a few thoughts there. So one, 100% guarantee that it's at one of the shops somewhere there is whatever office it happens to be in, there's someone with a military background. And so that being said, I would first seek out the individual or individual with a military background and just ping them with an email, whatever it happens to be, and set up a time so you can talk with them at a high level. We call them informational interviews before, but basically you're always under an interview, but I think that'll help give you perspective on their specific firm and what they may be looking for, and also be able to provide you with some advice. Once you go there, I would reach out to other additional folks, and that's essentially you want to build a pyramid, if you will. You want to build the base of the pyramid of people that you know within management consulting that can send you in the right direction, and from there, I would say they would be able to lead you in a better direction as far as how to obtain a position in one of their firms. I don't want to speak further than that because I actually don't have any expertise there, but I think building that base of a network is important to be able to put you in the right direction. And Sean, if you have any additional thoughts.
I think that's spot on. I think also, too, doing as much research as you possibly can on the firm itself, right? If there's a specific area of focus that you feel that you have a relevant skill set that you can apply to, I would definitely do that as far as the big three firms. If you wanted to expand that out and say the top 5 consulting firms, you know, I know for a fact that Deloitte has a very vibrant veterans network, and they have a person that's solely dedicated to evaluating veteran candidates. And so if you can also, in conjunction with what Ryan said, see if those firms have a veterans initiative, I would definitely go ahead and reach out get in touch with that person to sort of see what options that they have to set up as many informational interviews that you have. Go through their official hiring process, which means case interviews and, you know, a whole host of other things. So you also need to prepare yourself as if you're just, you know, Joe or Jane average walking in off the street applying for these, because there is that expectation for you to be at the same level, if not beyond, as everyone else who's applying. So just keep that in mind. Make sure that you understand the dynamics as you pursue these opportunities with these various firms, especially the ones that are sort of the top tier.
Perfect. Look, I want to leave folks at least with my thoughts. I know you can answer some additional questions, Sean, as you go along, but I'd say just the 3 big takeaways, or 4 if you will, that I'd love to leave folks with. 1, you have skills that are extremely valuable, not only now, but in the civilian workforce. 2, there have been many folks, many military folks have successfully transitioned, and it's not an overly monumental task, and there are many different paths to go down, whether it's direct to recruiter or via business school. And I guess the last thought is, no matter what, make sure you tap into the military network of veterans that are out there, because they will be absolutely invaluable to you as you go along to provide sage advice that you may not have even thought of, and will greatly impact your career as you go forward. And I'll leave with one anecdote. One of my friends from the Air Force Academy that I graduated with, we were both on the same trajectory in terms of wanting to go to business school, but I was more focused on schools that I thought I, for sure would be able to get into. He subsequently went on a trip and went to the Chicagos and the Whartons and the Harvards of the world and tapped into the military networks there, and was able to show the path forward to be able to gain admission to those schools. So I bring that up from the standpoint that I wouldn't have even applied to University of Chicago if it wasn't for this individual. So make sure you tap in those networks, because it will greatly impact the road that you go on, because of the different viewpoints and variations of things that they've been through that you may not have. So that, appreciate everyone listening in, and I do apologize for having to leave early, but it's the nature of the beast in my given career field. So I wish the best of luck to everyone, and Thanks for taking the time.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan. It's a pleasure, sir.
Absolutely. All right. Take care, everyone.
See you. Good luck. So, Lauren, how would you like to proceed? How many additional questions do we have in the queue? And I'm really glad that Ryan was able to get on the line his experiences, because Ryan did transition directly from active duty into the business world via business school. And so he has some very wonderful experiences and perspectives. And those of you on the call, if you do get his contact information, please drop him a line saying thanks. And if you have any subsequent questions, don't hesitate to ask. He is very much a part of the community that wants to give back.
That's great. I'm glad he was able to join the webinar today. I think in terms of proceeding, we've got quite a few questions that have come through and some questions that are still unanswered from prior to the webinar. So I don't mind reading those, and then if you want to answer them, we can proceed that way.
Yes, ma'am.
So one that we got was, what are some of the best career organizations or sites for military to civilian transition?
Well, that's an excellent question. The one that leaps off the top of my mind would be the 100,000 Veterans Initiative. They have a whole host of resources, and for those of you that aren't familiar with it, a number of companies, to include J.P. Morgan and a number of other top-tier firms, have signed up to hire as many veterans as possible, with 100,000 being the goal. I think in its short existence of a program, they have blown past that goal, and they're going to continue on. And so if you go and you research the 100,000 Veterans Initiative and you look at some of the links that they have associated with that, that's one path. For those of you that have a Service Academy background, I'm sure that you're getting pinged if you've registered for the Service Academy career conferences, which again are great ways for you to get a broad exposure to a variety of top-tier firms across a variety of different domains. By going to those types of websites, SACC, and researching some of the things that they have there, I think you'll also get a nice series of activities and an overview as far as some of the organizations out there that can help in that transition. Depending on where you went to school, you know, Service Academy, RTC, wherever, I would also go back, and this gets back into the early parts of our conversation, see in that career services organization where they have some touch points into the civilian sector as far as career transitioning for military members. That's always a good place to ask because, you know, fortunately, there seems to be a greater focus on bringing veterans into the workforce and a renewed commitment by a number of top-tier firms. So I would definitely go ahead and try to leverage that. And then also, too, and I think this is a very excellent point that Ryan brought up, one of many, is that, you know, if your own personal networks and your own organizations on an active duty standpoint, I'm sure you have other folks in your community and in your network that have made the transition. Please, I encourage you to reach out and get in touch with them and try to get that multiplier effect of what information that they have that can be passed along to you that you can piggyback off of and capitalize moving forward. Because a lot of these folks are more than happy to go ahead and offer up their experiences, right? So those of you who are familiar with a gentleman by the name of Eric Gleacher, Eric Gleacher is a retired Marine or a former Marine, went into finance, worked at Morgan Stanley, started his own mergers and acquisitions and advisory firm, and has made two gracious generations to Chicago Booth. One to actually get the building named downtown, the Gleacher Center in downtown Chicago, and then he's also made a subsequent generous gift to actually help veterans go to Chicago Booth and get their MBAs in conjunction with the Yellow Ribbon Program and a host of others. You know, if you're able to go ahead and network and get in good with someone like an Eric Gleacher or someone of that stature or someone who also has charted off what some would consider an unorthodox path post-separation or retirement, I would highly encourage you to do that because that person is going to bring their network, their experience, and their credibility to open up a lot of doors for you. So hopefully that answers the question, and if not, and if we're not answering these questions in the way that the person who asked the question wants, more than happy to share my contact information, email, or get on a phone call with you personally and drill down a little bit more.
Great, thank you. And people can always chat in as well if they want further details. So we'll definitely cover all the bases. Another question we have is, do you have any insight for transitioning officers interested in entrepreneurship? Any perspective on how investors view veterans?
Excellent question. And I'd say just about with everything, it's mixed, right? You're going to have some investors out there that have not a clue as far as what that intangible brings to the table. You know, they might have a Hollywood view of what the military happens to be. I can tell you, being out here in Silicon Valley, you have a fair number of venture capitalists that really don't have a clue as far as what a military background means. At the same time, you do have some very prominent venture capital firms here that really do understand the intangibles that a military background brings to the table. Case in point, Andreessen Horowitz. If any of you are familiar with Mark Andreessen or Ben Horowitz, A16Z is one of Sand Hill Road's preeminent venture capital firms, and they do a lot of work with the public and the private sector interaction, so much so that they bring a lot of their portfolio companies out of Silicon Valley to the National Capital Region in Washington, D.C. to make sure that the senior leaders and other folks within that community are aware of what's the latest and greatest in emerging technologies. So if you are a venture capitalist or someone who's an entrepreneurially focused individual, I would highly encourage you to research some of these venture capital firms that actually do straddle that public and private sector intersection, because telling and sharing your story is going to be infinitely easier for them to understand versus going to some place where, you know, it might not necessarily really care at all if you have a military background. And again, this gets back into tapping into your networks, right? Being able to go ahead and find out what's the profile of the investment profile and what the typical portfolio company looks like from an investment standpoint. I can also tell you there's a gentleman by the name of Paul Madera. Paul Madera is a former 16 driver. He ended up going to Stanford GSB, getting his MBA, and is now running a company called Meritech Capital. And Meritech Capital is invested in firms as diverse as Salesforce.com all the way through till Facebook. They were one of the initial institutional investors. And so, Paul, if you were an entrepreneur, or Mark Andreessen, Ben Horowitz, and you were able to leverage in a creative way your military background as it relates to your enterprise or the overall mission objectives that you have for that company, they would definitely probably give you some additional insights and attention that another team that might not have your skill set might get. So with that being said, definitely do the research, which is probably key to all the things that we've discussed up to this point in the call. Do the research on the people that you're going to be meeting with, do the research on the firms that you're going to interact with, and to make sure that you're able to go ahead and transition your story and translate your story to a way that's in a way that's relevant for them and their frame of reference.
Awesome. I've got another question here, and we've talked about this a bit, so I don't know if there's any more detail you wanted to add, but best venues to find vets to hire, also funding for national security and energy national security firms.
So on that last one, because I do agree that we've addressed, I think, probably the early parts of that question, is that you know, there are a number of entities out there that do provide grants for innovative new technologies. I can tell you for a fact that the Department of Energy has a thing called ARPA-E, Advanced Research Projects for Energy. You also have the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. You also have Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology, and now coming online with DIUX, the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental. There are a host of entities out there that are trying to get innovative thinking and capabilities behind the curtain in the public sector. So by doing your research and finding out who these entities are and whether or not you might have a direct or a not too tangential connection to these organizations could be really valuable to your fledgling enterprise. And also, too, you know, make sure that that grant or that endeavor that you pursue is advancing advancing your overall objectives, right? So if you have an overall objective to one day to be the dominant commercial provider of X, and you actually decide to go and tap into the public sector through the Department of Energy or Department of Defense, keep in mind that that could also become a distraction for you, yet only you can make that determination as to how that sort of factors into the overall objectives you have for the firm. So I think stepping back is that, you know, mapping out where you want to be 12, 24, 68 months down the road, and sort of mapping out in conjunction with that timeline, where do you see your venture going, and who are the folks that can actually provide some direct assistance to you to meet that ultimate objective. But yeah, there are some mechanisms out there, and I'm more than happy to actually have a more granular conversation with the person who asked the question. You know, at the conclusion of this call is sometime in the future.
Great, thank you. Maybe we'll give another minute or two for people to submit their last bit of questions, and then we can wrap up and give everyone a little bit more time in their day.
Perfect, and thank you. And Lauren, thank you so much for putting this on together. And, you know, I can tell you for a fact that, you know, it can be overwhelming in doing the transition if you're coming straight off of active duty, or if you separated from active duty, have a little bit of experience in the civilian arena, decide to go back to business school, and then go into something that's completely dissimilar from what you were doing pre-business school. You know, as Ryan and I were getting prepared for this phone call, and I think he teased this out a little bit, look at this next transition that you're undergoing in your career as just another PCS, right? You're just doing another permanent change of station. It might be a little bit more extreme as far as the scope of what you're doing, yet at the same time, you know, by and large, they're not lobbing, you know, things at you on Wall Street or any of these consulting firms. So you've probably seen the worst that you're going to see in your life from a professional standpoint as far as stress. You know, just managing the process and remaining cool, calm, and collected and getting the job done is the way that you're going to advance your career.
Great. The question that we just got was, how do you join the Military Alumni Affinity Group? And I can answer that one if you'd like.
Please do.
So if you Google U Chicago Military Affinity Group, there's an option to sign in, and that's how you can become a member of the group, and you can opt into communications and newsletters, and will be kept abreast of everything going on with the group itself. And then final question here, do you have any guidance for retired officers?
Well, with regards to, so there's a couple of ways. If you're a retired officer, and please follow up with an additional clarification on this, if you're a retired officer looking to go into education, that's one thing. If you're a retired officer looking to go directly from retirement into the next phase with a civilian job, you know, those are two separate things, and I'll try to address both of them. And if there's a third out there that doesn't coincide with what I'm saying, please let us know. With regards to retiring, if you're contemplating going back to business school and you're grappling with the fact that you have 20-plus years under your belt, I would encourage you, and I've encouraged all of my friends in my year group who are retiring, to at least go back and do something that helps diversify and build your network. And if that means you going back and getting an MBA, either a full-time, part-time, or through an executive program through an employer, I highly encourage you to do that. If it means you actually, you know, taking some classes online and getting that educational benefit because you're going to springboard into something separate and apart from that official checkbox, if you want to call it that, of going to an institution, then that's another way of doing things. But I think being able to leverage what you've done in your background and to that next chapter is so vitally important by showcasing some of the successes that you've had in a successful career. The fact that you were able to get 20-plus years under your belt doing a variety of different things around the world says quite a bit about your capabilities, right? Now, what I will tell you, and this is something that they tell a lot of junior officers, and they tell, I think, a lot of, enlisted midway through a career, is that at the 10-year point, that's sort of the make or break inflection point, if you would, of actually getting out and going off into a civilian job, right? I think that that was advice of 20 years ago. I think that that's sort of changed now because, the workplace is so fluid and so dynamic that people are willing to take on someone who has 20, 30 years of experience and a discipline and bring them on board to, build out that enterprise. At the same time, getting back to the prejudice that somebody might have as they're evaluating your candidacy, they might think that you're too mentally or stylistically inflexible to be malleable enough to go into their enterprise. So please recognize the fact that that might be a bias or perception or a prejudice that they may have against you. And anything that you can do to dissuade them of that opinion or that perception, I think is really cool. If you're looking to evaluate going straight into business school or actually go ahead and just transition straight into a civilian job, again, just highlighting the fact that you have such great things under your belt that you're going to provide value one. Is a very vital thing. But again, I go back to trying to diversify your network, maximize your optionality by getting some kind of a degree or something that augments your experiences in your career up to that point to where you're even more marketable than you were going into that initial conversation. Lauren, does that answer the question, you think, or what are your thoughts?
I think it does. I think it was really nicely answered, so thank you. And I think that pretty much wraps up the question portion. If there's anything else you'd like to add as closing remarks, feel free to, and then we'll wrap it up.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you. And thank you, Lauren and Dan and everyone on the call for your time today and submitting your questions and offering up your ideas. Just trying to bring together both Ryan and my comments together. You have an amazing series of experiences and skill sets in your background, and you have a network of individuals out here that are more than happy to go ahead and lend their expertise, their experiences, and their viewpoints to help you get to that next level in your career. Please leverage the networks. Please don't be shy about what you've done in the past. You don't need to be braggadocious, yet at the same time be confident moving forward into this next phase of your career. You have a lot to share, and there are a lot of people out there that want to have your skill sets and perspectives in their enterprise. So as you go down this path, please leverage Ryan, leverage me, and just remember at the end of the day, the bottom line goal is to maximize your optionality. And what I mean by that is that, one of the things that a lot of folks try to do in the military is to go ahead and achieve that skill set or that mission objective as soon as possible. That's great and that's fine, yet at the same time, maximizing optionality means possibly going to a full-time program to get an MBA as opposed to a part-time program where you can rush through it. And the reason why is having that optionality of being able to meet with classmates and build up relationships with a whole new network of folks will do some great things for you in your career down the road. One story, and this will be the closing story that I'll pass along to you all, is that those of you on the phone watch television, so you're very familiar with NBC and have gone to Universal theme parks and gone to the movies. But for a while, when General Electric divested NBC Universal and sold it over to Comcast, for a while there was only one financial intermediary that was on that transaction, and that was J.P. Morgan Chase. Well, you ask, well, how is that possible? Shouldn't there be two financial services firms representing the buyer and the seller on opposite ends of that spectrum? I said, true, yeah, absolutely. That eventually did happen, but when that deal was initially being formulated, it involved only three people representing three companies. So you had Jeff Immelt, who is the CEO of General Electric. He was class of '83, HBS. And then you had Steve Burke, class of '83, HBS. And then as the financial intermediary that was on that transaction, you had Jamie Dimon, who was class of 82, HBS as well. I mean, these guys were probably doing keg stands together back in, back in the early 80s. And so those types of relationships are impossible to forge by you just working hard, right? So if you are considering going to business school, or if you are considering, taking something that might be a little bit longer but exposes you to a greater number of folks, I'd say if it lines up with you and your overall objectives, maximizing your optionality about building out that network is probably the thing that's going to give you the biggest dividends, more so than whatever you learn in the classroom. So with that being said, thank you so much for your time. If you have any follow-up questions for Ryan or me, please don't hesitate to let us know. Lauren has our contact information, and more than happy to get on the line and just drill down as appropriate. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Sean, for giving a wonderful presentation and discussion that I'm sure everyone on the line really appreciated. And thank you for everyone who was able to join us today. As a reminder, please watch your email for a link to the recording of today's presentation, along with a follow-up survey. We also invite you to join us online at careers.uchicagoalumni.org, where you will find upcoming events, webinar archives, our alumni job boards, and a form to let us know when you have hired another UChicago graduate at your organization. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next Alumni Career Webinar.
Thank you.